Hey everyone, I hope your 2021 is going well. Today we're going to be talking about Neofeud, a point-and-click adventure game made by Silver Spook Games, which is a one-man team based out of Hawaii. This video is going to be a little different from the format I've followed thus far, so I'm going to hit you with a spoiler warning right here. Despite how much I might tear into the game and the title of the video, I actually did really enjoy playing this game, at least at times, and I would encourage you to buy and play it. The only thing I feel like I should comment on that might encourage you not to buy it, there is a character who uses the N-word frequently, but since they serve as a sort of parallel to the experience of poor Black Americans, it might be more complicated than that, and I'm a white dude. I don't want to make the final call on that, but I want to put it out there for you if that's a deal breaker. With all that said, spoilers for the major plot events of the game from here on out. In this game, you play as Carl Carbon, a mild-mannered social worker and ex-cop working for Child Protective Services. A couple things happen in the beginning that teach you the basics, but the real story picks up when you go on a call to investigate a robot family and check if they have a safe home for their also robot children. The rules are pretty firmly stacked against the robot family, and even if you deliberately ignore the rules, you go outside and get a call from your boss, who threatens your estranged family unless you go back in and find an excuse to take their children away. Normally, I'm against games that have decisions that don't impact the overall story, but they're doing something here where they're setting a specific tone and establishing just the kind of power and corruption you're up against for the rest of the story, so I think it makes sense here. One of the children who was supposed to be seized, named Proto-J, was not at the apartment during the raid, but you met him earlier without realizing it and figure out he's probably hiding out at a bar not far from where he lives. You go there to find him and discover he's actually a drug lord running a gang of robots distributing a drug called Mythium that acts sort of like a harmful psychoactive specifically for robots. This is actually a pretty important part of the plot, but rather than spoil everything that happens, I will just say there are a lot of parallels between Mythium in this game and the crack cocaine epidemic of the Reagan era in the US. You get swept up in a raid on the bar by police who are looking for Proto-J, but are saved by a mysterious stranger who you met before just outside Proto-J's house, and you're taken aboard a time-traveling spaceship. Once you're on the ship, you're introduced to Princess Sybil Clington Bush, a royal member of the Neofeudal Council that controls the world, who is trying to take them down from within. I'm going to skip over some events that are important to the plot of the game, but not to our discussion of its politics. The only thing that's really relevant is during all of these events we learn about a project called the Garden of Forking Paths, which allows its user to rewrite reality and enter alternate universes and other cool sci-fi stuff. After we learn about this and a bunch of other stuff, we go to try to talk Sybil's father, the leader of the Neofeudal Council, into changing his ways and being a more charitable leader. This goes poorly and ultimately results in the gang deciding they have to kill him at the next big council meeting and use the rules of the council to have Sybil ascend to the throne. A lot more plot stuff happens after that, but as far as our discussion of the game's politics go, that's really all you need to know, so let's get started. A lot of the things I have issues with have to do with Princess Sybil Clington Bush's role in the story, but I'd like to be positive for a second here first, because there are some things I do like about this game. For starters, I like the presentation of the rest of the Neofeudal Council aside from Sybil. I feel like in America we tend to treat wealth as kind of a neutral force. The public perception of Bill Gates, for example, is that he's a pretty good guy, at least now, because he gives so much money to charity and participates in medical research. And billionaires like Jeff Bezos are seen as bad, because they don't do that. While some billionaires might be shown as good and others bad, the fact that they are billionaires is usually presented as neutral, in that we rarely contemplate how they earned their $1 billion, or if they even earned it at all. So why is that a bad thing, and what does it have to do with Neofeud? The answer to the first question is if you asked an quote-unquote good or bad billionaire whether we should, for example, raise the minimum wage to $20 an hour, both of them would say no.
Just curious, what do you think about the minimum wage? Should it be raised? And should we want to see models more like Costco, where companies pay their employees a lot more than the minimum wage?
Well,
to
jobs are a great thing. You have to be a bit careful that if you raise the minimum wage, you're encouraging labor substitution, that you're going to go buy machines and automate things or cause jobs to appear outside of that jurisdiction.
Because it's not about surface level charity to them, it's about power. What Neofeud correctly identifies is that wealthy people can never truly be convinced to abandon exploitative practices, because truly doing so would require them to abandon the wealth they attained through said exploitation. And so long as capitalism is the dominant ideology in society, abandoning wealth can never be considered an option, because abandoning wealth would simply lower you down to the class being exploited by the rich people who don't abandon their wealth. And here's where we need to start talking about Sybil, the daughter of a billionaire who seems to at least be genuinely interested in abandoning wealth and building a more equitable future.
Well, like I said, I'm royalty, and that's the problem. Inequality. The 1% and the people living in, well, hell on earth.
So, what are you gonna do about it?
I am not entirely sure, to be honest. Like I said, I'm a celebutante and a princess. That's what I've been groomed for my whole life. The smiling and waving, the charity balls, gold leaf cake, and flying limousines. It's just so tedious and empty. But I want to do something that actually matters, you know? I think you two can be part of my team. Cooperative. I'll have to come up with a good name.
Now, in general, I'm not opposed to a character like Sybil existing in the story. But what I do take issue with is that Sybil is the driving force of the revolutionary movement throughout the game, and is given a lot of the big sort of savior moments that I don't think would happen without her influence on the story. Like, for instance, the very moment we're introduced to her, where her time-traveling spaceship is the only reason the story can progress. And throughout the story, she is usually the one deciding where the spaceship goes next. You get some trivial control over it, but really it's always her. And on top of that, there are 2 members of the oppressed class Sybil is trying to free on the team, but they are never given the opportunity to make meaningful decisions that the entire team has to support. And while Sybil's motives here do appear to be genuine, it does remind me a lot of the way that actual wealthy people in real life utilize nonprofits to control revolutionary movements and in a way stifle revolutionary action. Here's a quote from "The Revolution Will Not Be Funded Beyond the Nonprofit Industrial Complex" that kind of explains what I'm talking about here. Many white-led social justice nonprofits proclaim, in everything from their mission statements to their funding proposals, that they are committed to improving the social and economic conditions of the oppressed communities in which they operate. But alongside these proclamations exist a persisting hierarchy and circulation within capital of the social justice movement. Significantly, the manner in which that capital is circulated among social justice groups, once the wealthy do decide to make a charitable gift to the movement, is often ignored or grossly understated by white leaders within the progressive philanthropy movement. We see Sybil here exerting that kind of control over the revolutionary movement, determining how resources are used. And in terms of accountability, we only get one really big scene where we investigate her motives, where they turn out to be genuine. But also, all the reasons we can't go with an alternative solution that doesn't involve Sybil ascending to power come from Sybil herself, and we really never get to interrogate whether what she tells us is true or not. So here we have a person controlling how resources are spent within the movement, and only really offering solutions that just so happen to give her a little bit more power in the end. And I think this really could have been an interesting dynamic for the character to have, but to explain why I didn't end up liking it, I am going to need to spoil the last few scenes of the game. So here's another spoiler warning and a quick opportunity to click off the video if you want to play it for yourself first. Still with me? Okay. So at the end of the game, after some other shenanigans happen, Sybil does take control of the Garden of Forking Paths. What happens when she uses it to rewrite reality, though, is she doesn't really end up creating the kind of society she promised when we were introduced to her. She undoes all the harm caused in the climax of the game, But she doesn't really go further than that. We fast forward to some amount of time later, and there's still a pretty clear class divide. There's still floating cities and a much worse off city underneath. After she resets the timeline, she gives Carl his old boss's job at Child Protective Services. And to his credit, he does use it to be less corrupt than his old boss was and actually allocate funds to people in need. But with the power to rewrite reality as you know it, wouldn't it make more sense to create
post-scarcity luxury space communism?
And in the scene where we see Carl taking his boss's old role, we also see a couple other antagonists meeting with him, and Sybil walks into the room. She informs them that not only is she cutting them off from the government money they were previously using, but they will have to give up all their funds for 1 year and live like normal people. Take note here that it's a temporary thing. They get it all back presumably at the end of that year. And even though she's cutting off the funds they were stealing from the government previously, it's not like they were hurting for their own money anyway. One of them is mentioned to have like $1 trillion business. So as long as they make it through that 1 year without all their resources, then they can just go right back to doing what they were doing before, like nothing happened. And Sybil's reasoning for this punishment for them doesn't really seem to be punishment for doing wrong so much as trying to teach them empathy. And I'm not necessarily opposed to the idea of trying to teach people to develop empathy for those less fortunate than them. I think that is a worthy endeavor where it seems possible. The thing that makes me feel like it wouldn't work here is the way they react to being told what this punishment is. The fact that they're so upset at this revelation, maybe even terrified, to me suggests an acknowledgement that they already know how bad it is for other people. And in my opinion, I don't think the kind of people who already know how bad the lower class has it are the kind of people who you can just teach to empathize with them by showing them how the other half lives, because they already know. So that's really where I feel like my main problems with Sybil's revolution lie. I was kind of hoping for this big revolution and world-shaking event, and it feels like we really just got a regime change. And all of the changes we get are things that could easily be undone if a more corrupt or even just as corrupt ruler as the one we ousted were to come back into power. Not to mention the fact that Sybil herself could abuse the power, or even Carl and Protege could now that they're insiders to the elite class. And I'd just like to acknowledge here you might disagree with me for any number of reasons, and that's fine. In fact, I would still encourage you to please play the game for yourself and decide for yourself what you think. I tried to make the case for what I think about the game, and I hope I made my case well, but I did try to show that I think there's both good and bad things about it, and there are parts of the plot I just didn't cover because it didn't have anything to do with my arguments. But those might convince you of something else that I didn't see. Not to mention there is a Neofeud 2 in the works, so for all I know, maybe all the criticisms I pointed out here are just building to something that's going to be in Neofeud 2, and I'm going to look like a clown. And putting the politics aside here, it's just a really good adventure game made by one dude. That's really impressive. Ultimately what it comes down to is I would rather see 100 more experimental one-man projects that get a couple things wrong like Neofeud than 100 new cyberpunks made by AAA developers following a formula, overworking their developers, and just generally doing things that are bad for the consumer. You can pick Neofeud up on Steam or on itch.io for $15 and it's worth every penny. Or, if you're feeling extra generous, you could support the creator on Patreon, where the creator is posting regular updates on all of the projects he's working on, including Neofeud 2. Hey, thanks for watching to the end of the video. I'm honestly not sure how I feel about this one. I wanted to keep polishing the video more, but at this point, January's video's been pushed so far into February that I'm going to be rushing to get February's video out on time. If you like this video, let me know by hitting that like button and letting me know what you think in the comments. The feedback I've been getting on these videos has been really helpful the past few months. And I especially want to know what you think about this one, because I feel like I went in a really different direction than I have before with these videos. Until next time though, thank you all for watching.